Hi, I'm Dina Chaitowitz. I'm on the board of directors of the Jewish Federation of New Hampshire. I'm here with Tom White, who is the coordinator of educational outreach at the Cohen Center for Genocide and Holocaust Studies in Keene, New Hampshire. Tom is an expert in Holocaust and genocide studies and was instrumental in drafting the act relative to genocide and Holocaust studies that became law in New Hampshire in July 2020. Tom, thank you very much for helping to create this educational video, which we hope will be used in connection with International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So my first question is, Tom, why did the United Nations General Assembly designate January 27th as International Holocaust Remembrance Day?
Thank you, Dina. The date was chosen as the moment where Soviet troops liberated Auschwitz in 1945. And as Auschwitz was a symbol of the Holocaust, it became a moment for all countries, especially European countries, to look at the issues of education, remembrance, collaboration, all the challenges Europeans face in remembering what happened during the Second World War. In the end, remembrance leads to education, which leads to resiliency in confronting issues of anti-Semitism, targeting, and hatred.
Thank you. Auschwitz wasn't the only death and concentration camp. Is that right?
There were indeed, this is now a survey of historians that the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum brought together by 2013 and had identified 42,500 camps and places of atrocity. These camps ranged from the concentration camps that emerged early on in the regime, in the first weeks of the regime in 1933, and approximately about 980 of those. And these camps would be located anywhere from the Channel Islands, where they had taken from Britain, throughout Europe, and even North Africa. There were probably around 30,000 forced labor camps, probably around 1,500 ghettos. These are at least what we've identified so far, and then 6 extermination camps that were located in Poland.
Just astounding.
I think that when you think of those numbers too, you start to wonder about how many people it takes to run those camps, supply them, be transferred into them. You start to realize that this is not an outbreak of madness or illness, but a society that dedicated itself to this project because they thought it was morally correct.
Who are the victims, Tom? They weren't it was wide ranging, was it not?
It really was. And the initial targets of Nazism were political opponents. And that was early on in the early camps. If you were arrested as a Jew in the early days, it was really more of your political affiliation. And then it became into groups known as asocials. That would be homosexuals. It would be people in the eugenics program who were seen as a racial threat. And eventually, as the war progressed, we had from Nazi terms, the handicapped or the life unworthy of life, all the way through into the camps. And the primary target of many of the camps later in the war were in fact Jews. This became sort of the prime target for the Nazis. But I would also say another prime target are the Roma Sinti people, collectively known with a pejorative gypsy term. They too shared a similar fate of Jews in Europe.
So in addition to the approximately 6 million Jews who perished, how many other people died during the Holocaust?
And it's a figure we don't know. Often people will cite 5 million. No one knows to estimate. So we're talking at least probably a couple million more. It's very hard to sort of say.
Mm-hmm. We always think, or some people think about the people who died or who suffered but survived as victims. Is there another way to think about them?
It's a terrific question, Dina. And I think every time I work with survivors and from genocides from Cambodia, Bosnia, from the Holocaust, the one thing that they always say to my mind is they never call themselves victims. They call themselves survivors. And that might seem like a minor difference, but I don't think it is. A victim is someone who doesn't have a life anymore, who can't live, who have lost all that because of the perpetrator. So the survivors have chosen to live to survive. On the other side of that, if we approach this topic only looking at victims, the Jews who die in the camps or other targeted groups, we never really make a human connection. We can easily condemn them as that was a horrible thing that I wish never happens to anybody else again. But we never really see the humanity. We don't see the humanity of the children with their teddy bears who suddenly are told by perpetrators they have no right to live. We don't see the humanity of the perpetrators who are like all of us, loving family members, working at their jobs, and yet choose to annihilate other people and sleep very well at night because what they're doing is difficult, but in their mind, morally justifiable. So I think it's very important to get away from these labels and to look at the common humanity that will allow us to find empathy and then raise questions about our own behavior.
I've heard you talk about this topic before, fortunately, and one thing you point out is that the victims led normal lives. They were people who owned stores, who had farms, doctors, lawyers, whatever. And it sounds like you're saying the perpetrators were as well.
That's right. And I think you put your finger on something very important, which is, how this works is all of us are social beings. We all have multiple identities. It could be father, teacher, husband, whatever it might be. We collectively identify ourselves with groups, with sports teams, with whatever it might be. And that doesn't change for any human being. But the way genocide works is that the perpetrator begins to take away one by one your social identities, cuts you off from everyone else. And by the time it's over, they have identified you and narrowed you down to a single identity that they have put you into that box. So you become a Jew or whatever it might be. So that idea of destroying someone's social identity and all the multi-layered connections that brings with it is the process of genocide, which is a process. And when we get to our country, we look at sort of mascots of football teams that are Indians, right? This is the ultimate genocidal process where you have taken an individual and all their multi-connected social lives and reduced them to a mascot. And so this shows you how the process of genocide works.
What would you say is the top misconception about the victims?
I think about the victims is that they went passively, and this very much becomes the Nazi narrative to reinforce their own morality. But in every ghetto, every camp, people fought and resisted. The question is how? We always assume that fighting and resistance means armed combat. But these are civilians without military training, without access to weapons or supplies or maneuverability. And so what does resistance look like? It means getting up the next day and saying, I'm going to live one more day. It means I'm going to read a book. I'm going to still go sledding in the ghetto. It means I'm going to try to offer my crumb food that I have to my neighbor. And at the end, when you can have no choice other than to try to take up arms and fight, that's suicide because you are overwhelmed and don't have a chance. So I think the idea of resistance has to be looked at, that the human spirit does try to fight on, even though it was not given much room to survive.
I recognize that there are many, many lessons to take away from the circumstances that led to the Holocaust. But what if you were so limited? What is the one lesson you would want people to take away from what happened during the Holocaust, and particularly the students that we hope will be watching this video?
We see extraordinary events and we want to have extraordinary reasons for those events. And when you find out that actually what happened was extraordinary, but the behavior itself was very normal, all of us find our identities by pushing others away, feeling empowered by that, isolating ourselves. All these behaviors are always there. So there are really no extraordinary explanations for what happened, but that genocide is a process whereby day after day, incrementally it increases and gets more momentum toward a process of annihilation. So we can't look for extraordinary reasons, an outbreak of madness, or somehow it was a unique moment. These are very human behaviors that we're all capable of that over time and process can lead to mass destruction.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much for your time. This has been invaluable.
May I add one last lesson? We'll see how it ends up.
Absolutely, absolutely.
As we fight everything from anti-Semitism, bigotry, and hatred, we can't deal with those as singular, isolated acts. There's no way we'll win that way. The way that we win and defeat these things is embracing democracy. And the democracy means to embrace ideas that aren't comfortable to us, to dignify the other, to have functioning processes in place whereby these issues can be maneuvered through. And so democracy, though imperfect, is our best and only chance to stop the growing momentum of mass atrocity.
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you.